Okay, everyone, good morning. Hi, my name is Pamela Robinson. I'm a professor at the School of Urban and Regional Planning at Toronto Metropolitan University. I'm also the academic director at City Building TMU. We're excited today to have you joining us for a discussion about a new space for community in Brampton. Before we start, I want to begin with an acknowledgement of the land. Today, we find ourselves on our campus in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee people that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans and newcomers have all been invited into this treaty in a spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. As all of you know, our university changed its name. We just recently marked the 1-year mark of having our new name. But the name change of our university is only one step of 22 and something that the university calls the next chapter in terms of call to action to frame new ways of working with Indigenous community members. And so if you're interested in learning more about the next chapter and the other 21 recommendations and the things that we're working on our campus, you can follow up. We'll put a link in our chat. We're really glad today to welcome my dean, Professor Kiaras Gharabaghi from the Faculty of Community Services, and his home school is the School of Child and Youth Care. This project has been a passion project and an action project of Kiaras for a long time, and we're going to talk a little bit about its history. And one of the things that we're going to talk about today is why the Community Transformation Café is going to be located in Brampton and what it is about Brampton that makes it an incredible place to land this project moving forward in the future. Before we start, just a couple of housekeeping notes. If you look below on your screen, you'll see that there's a Q&A function. I'm going to ask a few questions to get us going, but part of what we're hoping is that all of you will engage as well. You can put your questions in the Q&A and I'll make sure to pick them up and direct them to Kiaras as we're going. And if there's a question that you really like that someone else has suggested, you can upvote it, but we'll try to make sure that we get through them all. So I've got about 20 minutes of going back and forth, and then we'll have lots of time for questions with you. The session's also being recorded. So if you know someone missed it or you think it's interesting and you want to share it through the City Building TMU website, you'll be able to follow up and link it. Okay, let's get on with our guest today. Kiaras, you'll just have to sit through, me as I read through your introduction. Dr. Kiaras Gharabaghi is the Dean of the Faculty of Community Services here at TMU and a professor in the School of Child and Youth Care. You can read all about his work in his professional story on the website, but I'm going to pick some interesting tidbits so you have a sense of where he's coming from. Kiaras joined TMU in 2006 after 25 years of practice as a social worker and a person who worked with youth in the social justice sphere. From 2014 to 2020, he was the director of the School of Child and Youth Care. And at that point, he worked to try to grow the school to reach new student populations and to reinvest in undergraduate curriculum to reflect the best of research, but also new opportunities for professional practice trends with impact. He really championed the new graduate program that he brought in during that time. And it was only the second graduate degree program in child and youth care in Canada. So that's a really important accomplishment. In 2012, he led with Melanie Panich, the Office of Social Innovation, and the development of our social innovation infrastructure at the university. Among a number of things that they worked on, Melanie and Kiaras worked together to initiate a process by which our university became the first Ashoka Changemaker designated campus in Canada. And it was in that work that the Community Transformation Café series got going. And so I'm going to stop introducing you and let's just get into the matter at hand. Welcome, Kiaras. Thanks so much for coming today. Why don't you first tell us what is a Community Transformation Café? How did it start? You can give the origin story.
Sure, not a problem. Thank you for having me, first of all, and hello to everybody who has joined us. I'm, I guess I should explain some of the words embedded in the phrase Community Transformation Café because they're all loaded words, really, and can be interpreted in lots of different ways. Let's start with the cafe part, which may not be the sort of typical academic way of describing things. We often talk about institutes and centers and those kinds of things. Perhaps it's a romantic vision, but a great deal of social justice-oriented change in history has happened through people gathering over tea and coffee, whether that's in Istanbul or in Paris or in Lagos. Social change usually happens through relationships, through intense discussion, through people sort of coming together and really thinking about what might be a better way, what might be useful for communities. And so we really like this idea of a cafe to signal very early on that we are stepping back from some of the presumed characteristics of academics doing things. We want to do things in the context of real people living real lives in real communities. And that means that the formality of how we usually do things has to really be transcended, mitigated a little bit, so that people feel invited. And when I say people, I don't just mean the people who usually get access to or in some way find their way into academia, into research and so on, but I really mean all people. I mean people who have an interest in the way in which life unfolds around them. So that's the cafe piece. The community piece is self-explanatory. We are the Faculty of Community Services. Community is central to absolutely everything we think about and do. We understand community is a complicated concept. There are many communities and sub-communities within communities and so on. But you know, our focus is to be amongst people, not just individually, but as groupings, as communities, as their lives are shaped and as they shape their own lives. And the transformation piece, of course, is aspirational. We are looking for engaging with people, partnering with people, with communities in such a way that we can aspire to positive things, to joyful things. Even I always intentionally use the term joyful, that are relevant to people as they live their lives. And we'll talk about this more, but there is one of the unique features of what we're trying to do is to not set out ahead of time what it is we're going to do. Our cue will come from the communities.
It's such an interesting opportunity. Maybe I'll just step back for a second for the folks who don't know the community that comprises community services. So we've got the schools of social work, child and youth care, early childhood studies, midwifery, nutrition, urban and regional planning, nursing, public health and occupational health, and the School of Disability Studies. And so one of my like corny planner jokes is that I'm the only planning school in Canada that shares the faculty table with midwives, but it's a really interesting collection of people. And so what is it about all of our schools and community members you think that makes this Community Transformation Cafe a good idea? Like what can we bring, but also what will we learn from it, do you think, as a community of people who are working with the next generation of leaders?
Yeah, you know, that's such an interesting thing, because I think for many, for a long time, the narrative about our faculty was that we are 9 very different schools with 9 very different sets of preoccupations. And, you know, that's a very 20th century narrative. The 21st century really features a different way for life to unfold, in which things like birth, as in midwifery, and death, as in social work and sort of lifespan practice, things like how places are constituted, how buildings impact space, how accessible, walkable communities are, and so on, all are fully integrated, really make up the experience of people living their lives individually and as a community. And so I think there is no better place than the Faculty of Community Services to really bring together ways of thinking and priorities, ways of conceptualizing life itself, that meets people where they are at, and people are in lots of different places at lots of different times. It turns out life is very fluid, and you know, it is not a matter. Nobody lives in a discipline. Let's be clear, nobody lives in a discipline. People live life and cut across disciplines. Life itself is transdisciplinary. So I think we're ideally suited. I also know that, you know, there are some lead terms that we talk about at this stage of our times, and perhaps the pandemic has really contributed to that as well. For example, health and well-being. And within health and well-being is about how we design communities physically, how we design public transportation, how we design buildings and their interface with technology and so on. But it is just as much about equity issues, about access to healthcare, about the way in which different kinds of knowledge about health, including Indigenous or Black or other community knowledges, might contribute to what we think about when we think about health and well-being in community and so on. So, you know, this really is about stepping away from the tradition of siloing knowledge and bringing together a really holistic way of thinking about how we can be in community.
So let's talk about where it's going to be located. I think if you ask lots of people and you said, okay, let's play a matching game, TMU, what location do you think of? People think of us being located just east of Yonge and Dundas, right? And that we're a downtown Toronto University with a city building agenda. And yet the Community Transformation Café is going to be located in Brampton. So maybe for the folks who don't know why Brampton, you could introduce a little bit why this particular location. Let's talk about Brampton as a partner in this work.
Absolutely, and you know, you're absolutely right. There is this long-standing perception of TMU being a downtown, you know, Toronto downtown university. There are a number of things that come into play here. One is our understanding of cities in relation to suburbs, and you know, there's been this long-standing construction of the cities around Toronto being essentially the suburbs of Toronto. But the reality is that cities like Brampton are thriving cities of their own. These are urban spaces. City building is not only a reference to downtown core sort of mega city building. Brampton, as it so happens, is one of the most thriving communities in our country, frankly, certainly in our province. And it makes sense to bring what we've learned about being in cities to emerging cities that are flourishing and that frankly hold much of the future of how we are going to be living in this space, which you appropriately described as an indigenous space, really. So that's one piece. The other piece is that although our core campus is located in downtown Toronto, the reality is our students, our staff, and our faculty are not. We are, while we do have people who live right around here, where I am in the downtown, but we have more than half of our people are actually commuting to our campus downtown. And many live in Brampton, particularly amongst our students. Many live in Brampton, have always lived in Brampton. This is their home community. This is the community in relation to which they want to learn about social work or nursing or midwifery or any of those things. And of course, our staff and our faculty also, in many cases, live in that area. And we think, you know, it is not, the pandemic certainly has had an impact in how we think about the value of commuting and the value of sort of one's local environment and how we engage with that. But I think long before the pandemic, it's become increasingly clear that we really have to transcend these ideas of pushing everybody to learn things or to engage with the area only around our campus, given that we know that for many of our students, what is really interesting is what they can learn at TMU to then bring to their own communities to improve and help within their own communities. And so beyond that, of course, the other thing that's happening is that TMU has really engaged in a very strong orientation and partnership with the city of Brampton. Through, in particular, its impending launch of a medical school in the city, which is a huge deal. Not only in the sense that it's great to have a medical school in Ontario, we know we need that, but also in the sense that it really connects the core of our preoccupation, which is health, well-being, equity, from our conversations in the downtown core to the conversations that we are already having and will continue to have in places like Brampton, and notably right now in Brampton. And just to note that, you know, beyond the medical school, of course, we have a number of other activities in Brampton already, including a cybersecurity center and so on, that all, I think, is really consistent with this idea that as we move forward, we cannot show up in siloed disciplines. We really have to show up collectively in a whole way and be engaged with people based on all of the dimensions of their lives, not just sort of the ones that we target because it, you know, for whatever reason.
One of the things, you know, our school has a long history of collaborating with the city of Brampton in terms of client-based studios where our students work on projects with staff from the city of Brampton. And one of the things I think that's so noteworthy is that from the get-go, staff at the city of Brampton have been incredible collaborators and initiators of really innovative and interesting work. And I think the opportunity for us to be more in Brampton than we are now with a real location is an amazing learning opportunity. I also think that it's a good reminder, it's really not very far away. For anyone who's never been, you can get to Brampton quite quickly on the GO train. I can get there almost as fast on the GO train as it takes me to bike to work in the morning. And so one of the things, like as a faculty member, that I really look forward to is with this Community Transformation Café opening is that we have an opportunity to go work with students in an enduring way where we can start and we can continue to scaffold projects together because we're building relationships with community members. So maybe we can like really get down to the sidewalk level. Where is it going to be located? Like if I open up the door, what's my experience going to be like?
So the location is going to be right in the heart of downtown Brampton, which means on Queen Street, which means that you open the door, and if you're in the space and you're looking out, you're opening the door to restaurants, to cafes, to people walking on the streets, to everything from business to community service is right there in front of you. It is, and I will say, for people who have not spent a lot of time in Brampton, you know, it actually is a beautiful, beautiful space. It's downtown Brampton has developed in ways that are really exciting, I think.
With amazing small businesses too. One of the
Amazing.
things I most love is like you can go and it's so unique because there's still small business in downtown, which is awesome, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, we think of every door in our neighborhood in that new space as a potential partner, as somebody we want to be talking with, as somebody we're going to invite into this space. But I think beyond that, so just to describe a little bit, you know, the space itself is the main floor of a two-story building. The upper floor of which is a community health, not a community, but rather a family health practice.
Oh, okay.
And so, you know, it has health, the building itself has health built into it, or health systems built into it. And we're very excited about that, actually, because that's a really good way of sort of co-locating oneself and thinking about things. The space on the inside is really designed with the concept of community-driven activity at its heart. And so we've taken a space that was, you know, it's about a 3,500 square foot space. It had lots of walls in it and rooms and these kinds of things. And we're taking all of that out. And it's going to be primarily a very large open space that will have an actual cafe associated with it. So we will actually serve you coffee if you come, and tea. And you know, it'll have some breakout areas and so on. But the thinking behind that really is that we want the space, the physical space, to be designed and redesigned for every use that it experiences. So rather than furnishing the space, sort of setting up what the space is going to look like, and then people having to fit themselves into whatever that setup is, everything in that space is going to be mobile, storable, and we can redesign this space from an empty large room to a fully equipped lecture hall in a matter of minutes. And that really is a unique feature because it will inherently, I think, be inviting to any community group that has ideas that normally may be difficult to match with a space congruent with operationalizing that idea.
So before I go on to my next questions, the chat's popping. Are you able to share the address yet, or is it still, or does ink have to be signed?
I'm waiting for one final signature to share the address, but again, I will say that if you are in the most central part of downtown Brampton, you would be looking at our space. So it's that's as close as I'll get to revealing the address.
Okay, let's talk about what's going to happen inside the space beyond having coffee and feeling welcome. You started this Community Transformation Cafe process back when you were the Sam Eaton chair, and that was an interesting. I remember when you introduced them that a donor's gift allowed for the innovation that let these cafes start to take hold. Can you talk a little bit about the kinds of conversations you had or the activities that you were hosting under the banner of Community Transformation Café?
For sure. So it was the John C. Eaton Chair. You know, at the time, for a number of years, we learned fairly quickly that when students and also community members join us in formal classrooms, that there are some boundaries around what can happen in those spaces. These are very positive spaces, good things happen, people learn things. But there are some boundaries around that because there are some norms that apply in a classroom space, some conduct norms and so on. We thought, you know, there are many social issues, social justice related issues, but also connections between social issues and business and connections between social issues and technology that never really find a space to be discussed by students, by community members, and by faculty members in ways that take away some of those boundaries, that allow for a much more open and free-flowing discussions in which no question feels stupid or out of place, and where discussions can go where the group of people coming together wants them to go. And so we started a series of inviting people and then inviting our students and faculty members too, with the instructions of, you know, introduce this particular topic, whatever it might be. In the past, it was anything ranging from children's rights to issues of racism in particular public sectors, to issues of entrepreneurship and how to give rise to it or nurture that, particularly in marginalized communities. And we said, but I want you to just introduce it and then take your cue from how people actually want to talk about these things. And we'll create an environment that is comfortable and in which people feel nurtured, so that it feels like a place of relative safety in which one can talk about things. And then we will create a space in which we will connect those people who want to take talk to action. And, you know, that's a very, very important component. And so we're taking the experience with putting on, we put on many sort of community transformation cafes in that context. And we're going to take this experience and give it a home, essentially. And so what will happen in the space that we're now creating is we're creating that space as fluid, which means that things will flow into it and flow out from it, as opposed to sort of a stationary place in which one houses a particular kind of activity. We are talking with some colleagues in our own faculty, as well as community members, about things ranging from Afrocentric or rather Black food sovereignty. We have a researcher who's doing amazing work in the Brampton community with youth, trying to sort of use agricultural production in an urban context as a way of identity formation and sort of harvesting cultural wealth. We're also talking about entrepreneurial activities. We're talking about the sort of ethical thinking in the context of healthcare provision with our partners in the Brampton area, including William Osler Health Systems. So you can see we have a project called the Terry Project, which is a project that connects students with people living in long-term care facilities and or receiving care in their home. So on the elderly side of things, and we really want that project to become really much more centered in the Brampton area and to invite community into that project. And, you know, interestingly, all of those things I'm referencing are things that are anchored through researchers, faculty members, and students belonging to or connected to, you know, 4, 5, and sometimes all 9 of our schools at the faculty. So they are all inherently interprofessional, interdisciplinary, and sort of go far beyond the silos in which these things are usually dealt with.
Okay. That sounds like fun. So some really practical questions. When's it going to be open? If we've got people listening who want to collaborate or partner or book the space, are those options?
Yes, absolutely. So we are expecting the final signatures to be in place really in the next week or two. We will do a very short period of reconstruction, which will probably last about a month and a half. And I say that, of course, knowing that no construction schedule has ever been on time. But nevertheless, we are optimistic and positive in our thinking, which means that probably by late summer, we will be convening in the space and we will start inviting people into the space. But it really means that we will have a much more exciting and fun launch in September and then go from there. People who become interested, we're not, nobody has to sign up. People don't have to be members of anything. There is no formal infrastructure of that kind. But in our developing relationships, as people become interested and have their own ideas about how they might interface with this space, things like booking space for a meeting, a gathering, to run a children's group, to do any of those kinds of things becomes entirely possible, and will develop the infrastructure to organize all of those things together. I should say that one of the things, and particularly if students are listening, I want to be really clear on, of course, we are always prioritizing and focused on students. And in this case, on students who live or call Brampton home. And, one of the things that we really envision happening in this space is students from across disciplines coming together and collaborating on projects, on things like studio projects, for example, that may be facilitated through the School of Urban Regional Planning, but also on matters of health equity, on matters of, on various kinds of projects. So students will, in particular, be welcomed into the space as an opportunity to collaborate.
That's exciting. Okay,
Yeah.
I have other questions, but I want to pop into the audience questions. One of our guests has asked, can we find online the nonprofits that we're working with in Brampton?
Yeah, we have. So I don't think currently that we have sort of an accessible list of all the nonprofits that we're working with in Brampton, but we already have a very impressive list of partnerships with NGOs generally. It's and not only NGOs, also as mentioned with the City of Brampton, with various business partners and so on. Some of I will say that, very prominent in sort of the list of partners are organizations that work in the areas of education, particularly early childhood education, but also education generally. Organizations that work in the area of child welfare and youth justice, as well as organizations that work in the areas of technology, and particularly the interface of social life and technology. And then, of course, writ large across all of this are organizations interested in health and health equity, access to healthcare, and those kinds of things.
Well, and presumably once we're there and the doors are open, we'll be able to start to build new partnerships.
Yes.
In the ways in which we work, which is, we want them to be real. We're a consistent presence, and we start to figure out together what might be possible, rather than just kind of coming in and being like, hey, we're here, right? And so I think that's one of the things to me about having a physical space that really appeals. Okay, let's talk about the importance of a bricks and mortar space. We've come through a time when we did a whole bunch of things online. Did you ever think about doing this as a virtual thing, or what's the importance of the actual physicality of this place? Why does it matter?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, there were many times actually over the last few years that, everything seemed necessary to conceive of as a virtual spaces. And there are many, many advantages, of course, to having capacity to gather virtually as well. And we will maintain that capacity within this space as well. Having said that, I think it's also become clear to most people that there really are some very substantive differences in sharing physical space versus coming together in a virtual way. They're not better or worse, they're just different. And particularly in the context of being responsive to specific cultural needs, identity needs, and so on, I think the opportunity to feel one another's presence and to not only hear about commitments of trying to be responsive and doing things together and so on, but to really feel one another's presence in a very physical and intimate sense is a key factor of the very notion of community service and of social justice, quite honestly. And so the physical space is important for that purpose. And there are, in fact, things that probably won't happen in a virtual space, where people really need to have ways of accessing a physical location at the rate and in the way in which they can or are comfortable to do. Sometimes it's you come in, you have a tea, you say hi to a few people, and sometimes it's you come in, you're going to spend the day and you're going to work on something with other people to try and do something. So having that whole range is useful. The only other thing I will say, and you would be, Pamela would be particularly familiar with the concept of placemaking, which, really is in urban planning is sort of a core concept, but, it really is. Having a physical space allows us to think about the way in which that space relates to everything around it and the impact it has on the physicality of space around our space. There is meaning in the way in which every day people will move from the space to the restaurant across the street. There is meaning in the way in which people will interact not only within the space, but also in getting to the space and in leaving the space and in connecting with other physical locations, including small businesses in the downtown area in particular. So all of those things are important.
Yesterday we held a session with Victor Perez Amato, who's a planning school faculty member, and Cheryl Diego, who's the placemaking and public realm director of the Young Dundas BIA. And the conversation that we had was about the importance of the university partnering with its neighbors, in part because the university has an economic impact in the neighborhood that it's in. And in this time after the pandemic, small businesses especially are really struggling from the lack of people's return to physical spaces. And so one of the things I hope that our cafe will do is provide more people and more opportunities for the small businesses whom we call our neighbors to start to have new people coming in. I also have to say, as a faculty member, I'm personally really excited about the idea that people can stumble into something interesting. Yeah. Uncorking wonder is a big part of what we do as faculty members, and it's harder to stumble on wonder when you're online. But if you're walking by and you hear something or you smell something good or something looks curious inside, the idea that you're welcome to come in and just check it out is really exciting to me. And I think it's one of those things we can't reproduce virtually. Everything virtually, you have to sign up and click. And, this is much more spontaneous. And I think that's good. One of our guest members, Dr. Jushi Wang, asked a question, which is really good. What's the plan to reach out to Brampton's communities who may not have good access to the downtown core because of limited mobility options or access to information and resources due to cultural or linguistic barriers? So how are we going to make this space truly accessible and opening and welcoming?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and one for which there aren't always easy answers. But operationally, we're thinking about it in a number of ways. One is we want to really harvest the diversity within our own sort of student body, faculty groups, and staff bodies, which is particularly important, I think, in relation to language and also sort of cultural customs and so on, in how one engages with people and how one even approaches people without immediately causing some difficulties or some safety concerns or whatever it may be. So part of it really is an iterative process in which we're going to draw on everybody who shows up and say, okay, you've showed up. Can we multiply the impact of your presence right now? Who do you know? Who do you think might want to know about this space? How can we connect with those persons or those communities? I think there is clarity. There is more clarity about what we don't want, and there is about what we hope will happen. And certainly what we don't want is for the space to very quickly get branded as being relevant to very specific communities or groups of people, which means it will be seen as not so relevant to everybody else. And that's why, it's a space in which we invite people into, but when those people become too take up too much space, and taking up space is a thing because it promotes exclusion to some degree. When people take up too much space, then we will talk with people and say, okay, given the space you're taking up, who's not coming? And, can we talk about that? And can we figure out how to overcome that? So that's going to be a big part, I think, of community partnership, of community engagement, will be to make sure that everybody who engages is also aware of what their engagement means for people who may not yet have engaged.
Well, and I'm hoping too that as we come and start to get to know our neighbors and the broader community, just because we have the cafe doesn't mean everybody has to come to us, right? And that it may be kind of home base for a chance to go and use it to extend into the community more, right? Because that's always been a value of how we've tried to work, I think, is in community with our community members. And so if the cafe isn't convenient for the work that we're trying to do, it just makes it easier to go out as we get to know the community better, how to work really meaningfully and authentically, I think, with the community members.
Absolutely.
Okay, really basic question. Is it going to cost money to come?
No.
No.
It's a really
Okay.
basic answer. No, it's this is not a we're not we want to be present in community. So this is not at all about the exchange of money. So
Okay.
no. Yeah.
Great. And okay, I mean, we're going to start to wrap up. So folks in the audience, if you've got any last questions, I'm going to get you to put them in. But Chris, how is the cafe going to share its ongoing events? Like, will there be a newsletter? Is there going to be, Twitter's not so awesome these days, but how do you get the message out about what's happening in the cafe, and how can people follow along?
Yes, we absolutely, of course, because it is centered around the Faculty of Community Services, it will appear with full sort of web presence on our faculty website, and we will publicize that through all of our social media channels and so on. Beyond that, we will work with the other elements of TMU's presence in Brampton to ensure that we cross-reference each other. So as a medical school comes into being, the medical school will be a site where you can access everything happening in the cafe, and the cafe will be a site where you can access everything that's happening in the cybersecurity space, and so on. So we will do all of that. But we will also work really, really hard to get information directly to communities. So we are going to work to try and identify those who have really good access to communities that otherwise tend to not access information through more traditional channels, and use, believe it or not, word of mouth, which for thousands of years has kept communities alive, as a way of making sure that information is shared.
Okay. And, it's interesting, like people who are listening may not know, like April Lindgren in the Creative School has a whole local newspaper project, right? Where April's been looking at the ways in which local newspapers, including newspapers that serve particular ethnoculturally specific groups of people, can help get the message out. And so I think there's going to be a really interesting opportunity for us to be creative in terms of tapping into the channels of knowledge sharing and communication in Brampton. And we've got some folks in the university, I think, outside our faculty who might be able to help us work with that. Okay, last question. I want to come back to your point about students. One of the things that we try to do in many of our programs in the university, but especially in the Faculty of Community Services, is to try to help students connect the dots between what they're learning in the classroom and what's happening in community. And a big part of that are experiential learning opportunities like placements or internships. How is the Community Transformation Café going to support students really grounding their learning in what community members need and want and hope for?
That's absolutely. This is a huge part of our faculty's work, really, is to connect students with community so that they can learn beyond the classroom. The first thing I want to say that this talk, this webinar and future activities are an invitation to everybody to really connect with us and say, okay, you know, these are things, whatever you're saying, that's all interesting, but here is something that's really on our mind. And we would love to have a group of students work with us to do these kinds of things. That's just a straight invitation. If you've ever thought about that, then please get in touch. And we are pretty confident that we have groups of students to be relevant and to meet just about any community need imaginable. So that's one piece. The other thing is the goal here is community partnership and engagement. And so we think that not only will we partner in ways that we are connected around things already happening, but that those partnerships will give rise of new innovations in community service. And those new innovations will have to be staffed, will have to be human resourced, and our students are available as a human resource that I think has been traditionally undertapped. Not as free labor, let me be clear, we value our students and their time is important, but rather as people who bring really in many cases the youth, because our students on average are in their 20s, not always, sometimes they're in their 40s and 50s, but who bring 21st century ways of being in community to wherever it is they go. And so it's an invitation to say, let's talk. We have a lot of people here who will bring interesting ideas and things and capacities. Let's talk about that if anybody needs to or wants to engage around that issue.
So one of the things that we're going to do after this session is over is we're going to email everyone who participated with a link about how they can reach you, so that people know. Okay, before we go, one last question snuck in. Can you say more about 21st century ways of being in the community? That's a big question to wrap this up with.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we have to, communities for a very long time were labeled in both normative ways, meaning certain judgments were made about what constitutes a good community, a well community, a community, and who is part of a community and who is part of a different community and so on. I think we are living in a time where all of those categories, all of those labels, all of those assumptions about how life actually unfolds for people on the ground have gone out the window, and they probably were never in place. But the challenge for us to undo some of that labeling and that characterization and that way of putting people into boxes and containers has never been greater. And I think the excuses to not sort of free us from those containers have run out, frankly. And so so when I talk about the 21st century communities, these are communities that at the same time are engaged around saving the planet due to climate change, in relation to climate change, to active involvement and incredible knowledge about technology and how it interfaces with everyday life, to real concerns around access to healthcare, to education, to public service generally, to entrepreneurship and innovation and creating new ways of generating wealth and well-being and so on. So life is unfolding in much more holistic and integrated ways than we have ever been willing to acknowledge. And much of the infrastructure that we bring to that life still is very much impacted by categories, labels, disciplines, silos, and so on. So we're trying to transcend this. This is only one small step. Many other people in community have been doing this for years, decades, sometimes centuries. But this is our very small step to try and get there.
Okay, thank you. So with that, we're almost at time. I want to thank our guests for coming. I want to say that if you're thinking, oh, I have an idea for what might happen at the cafe, you don't have to have a perfectly baked idea to bring it forward. I mean, one of the things about the way this cafe, Community Transformation Café, will work is that it's a space where people can roll up sleeves and work together and try to see what's interesting and what has potential. And so don't be shy. We'll follow up through the email address that you used to register to make sure we can connect you to Kiaras' office about potential opportunities. We also want to flag, I was speaking to your point, Kiaras, about the planetary emergency and the climate crisis, that our next session in this series is about policy biodiversity in the city. And it's about creating bylaws to support local ecological resilience, with Professor Nina Marie Lister and Elise Cook, moderated by Shri Sperda, who's the Executive Director of City Building TMU. I want to thank everyone who came today. We really appreciate your coming to listen to this discussion about what the Transformation Cafe might look like. I hope we can come back in a year and check in and talk about the first year of opening and how things went. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care. Have a great day. Bye.
Thank you.